A little girl stood frozen under an avalanche of hurtful words and harsh criticism from her stepmother, breaking down in tears and begging the woman to stop. But then, the situation took an unexpected turn when her father, a wealthy businessman, returned home, unannounced, and witnessed everything. However, what he did next was even more mind-blowing. Take a breath, get comfortable, and let the story unfold. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. Hello! I sincerely hope this narration serves as a comforting balm, helping you drift into a deeper, more restorative sleep tonight. Let's get started. Leonardo Guzman once believed that grief had an expiration date. He thought if a person worked hard enough, talked enough business, closed enough deals, and racked up enough frequent flyer miles, eventually, the past would simply vanish like steam on a mirror. But 3 years after his wife passed away, the house remained so hauntingly quiet that every step he took echoed like a lonely reverberation in an empty cavern. He lived his life like a meticulously programmed machine. He was up at 6 a.m. sharp, drank his coffee black, checked the financial news, went to work, and returned home only after the city lights had turned on. There was no music. No genuine laughter. If there was any sound other than the wind whistling through the windows, it was just the soft scratching of his fountain pen on paper. Only Clara, his 8-year-old daughter, was the reminder that Leonardo wasn't completely alone. The little girl was quiet, always clinging to her old doll, moving so lightly as if she were afraid of inconveniencing anyone. But every morning, he left a small note on the kitchen island. "Dad will be late. Please have dinner with the housekeeper." And almost every day, the note was simply read, never answered. Two people shared the same roof, but they inhabited two different worlds. One was running away. The other was just holding on. People called Leonardo the tragic guy in the expensive suit. He neither disagreed nor cared. He simply kept his head down and ignored the whispers. That is, until the day he met Isabella. He attended that charity gala out of obligation, not some newfound humanitarian spirit. But then she approached him, not trying to grab attention, but looking him directly in the eyes with just the right dose of sweetness and a lot of self-assurance. Isabella talked about children who had lost a parent, about organizing free art classes. There was something in her voice that made Leonardo stop. For the first time in years, he felt a genuine desire to listen. She didn't ask about his work or mention his wealth. She simply asked, "Have you ever been scared by the feeling that no one needs you anymore?" That seemingly simple question pierced directly through the deepest part of the loneliness he had been burying. He didn't answer. He just nodded slightly and managed to force a smile, however rare that was. From that day on, Isabella became a fixture in his rigid schedule. She would send text messages to check in, sometimes a photo of her afternoon tea with the caption, "You should take a break too." You know, when she stopped by his firm to discuss projects. Everyone looked at them with knowing glances, but Leonardo didn't mind. He felt at ease. The sensation of being cared for, even through a few lines of text, made him feel like a living person again. Clara naturally wasn't easily convinced. That child possessed an unusually sharp intuition, the kind of instinct found in kids who have witnessed too much sorrow without being able to express it. The first time she met Isabella, Clara stayed behind the staircase, watching the woman as if trying to decipher if she was authentic or an imposter. Isabella was cunning. She always knew how to avoid getting too close, but never stayed too far away. When Leonardo was home, she told stories, cooked Clara's favorite dishes like mac and cheese, and brought her little comic books. When Leonardo was out, she left the girl alone. She asked no questions, didn't touch her, only offered a slight smile. It was this careful balance that confused Clara. The little girl began to yield, at least when she saw her dad smiling more often. Leonardo didn't realize it, but for Clara, his smile was the most precious thing in the world. As long as her dad was happy, she was willing to endure anything. Maybe that's why, when Isabella moved into their house, Clara didn't resist. She simply retreated further into herself, as if making room for someone else to enter her dad's life. In the evenings, Leonardo started coming home earlier. He talked more about work, about what was cooking for dinner, about the weather things he hadn't done in 3 years. Isabella listened with sparkling eyes, as if every word he uttered had profound meaning. Clara sat at the edge of the table, playing with her vegetables, never interrupting. Sometimes he caught a glimpse of sadness in her eyes, but he reassured himself thinking that time would help the child adapt. Adults always think like that children are resilient, that they forget easily. But Leonardo didn't know that what he called editing was Clara learning to hide her fear. A month later, Isabella became a familiar image in every newspaper photo next to Leonardo. They attended events together, appearing in articles with headlines like, "The Wealthy Guzman and the Woman Who Helped Him Find His Smile Again." When reporters asked about their relationship, he simply smiled. "I think we all eventually need someone to make us want to come home." That quote made the front page. The next day, Clara read it. She didn't fully grasp the meaning. She only saw the photo of her dad and Isabella standing side by side. They looked beautiful, radiant. She folded the newspaper, put it on the table, and remained silent for a long time. But over time, Isabella became even more calculating. She appeared exactly when Leonardo was vulnerable, and vanished precisely when he needed space. People called her Guzman's latest miracle, and he sincerely believed that destiny had given him a second chance. The day he proposed, it was drizzling. There were no fireworks or extravagant party, just a simple dinner. Leonardo spoke with a deep, warm voice. "I've lived too long without laughter in this house. I want my daughter to have that back." Isabella took his hand with shimmering eyes. "I promise I will make you both happy." The promise was light as a breath, but later it would become the noose that choked their lives. Clara stood by the door, watching them embrace. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She simply turned around, whispering to herself, "If my dad can smile, then I guess it's okay." That night, Leonardo found his daughter asleep on the sofa with her storybook slipped from her hand. He carried her to her room, gently stroking her hair, telling himself, "Everything is going to be okay. Everything will settle down after the wedding." The Guzman house suddenly felt like a different place, orderly, immaculate, polished, but strangely cold. Isabella rearranged everything. She moved the picture frames, changed the curtains, and even dictated what they would have for breakfast. But everything was logical, organized, looking like a proper home to the outside world. But for Clara, it was no longer her home. Isabella had a particular type of faint smile, kind enough so others wouldn't suspect anything, but sharp enough that the person facing her feared talking back. When Leonardo was present, she transformed into the perfect woman. Sweet, refined, always seeking her husband's opinion, always smiling when Clara spoke. But the moment Leonardo walked out the door, that smile went out as fast as a blown candle. The first morning after the wedding, Clara reached for a bagel as she always did, but Isabella intervened. "No, today you're going to eat oatmeal. Kids need to eat healthier." The sentence sounded normal, but the way she said it, the cold, dry tone, made Clara afraid to argue. The little girl sat in silence, forcing herself to swallow spoonfuls of the thick oatmeal. Her eyes fixed on the empty chair beside her where her mom used to sit. In the following days, changes slid into every corner. Clara was no longer allowed to wear her pink dress because Isabella said, "That color is too tacky." The girl couldn't leave her hair naturally curly because it looked messy. Even the blanket her mother had given her before passing was packed away because it didn't match the bedroom decor. Leonardo noticed nothing unusual. He was busy, incredibly busy. He assumed Isabella was just trying to help Clara establish discipline, and honestly, he was grateful to have someone looking after the girl in his place. One afternoon, coming home early, Leonardo found Isabella supervising Clara's homework. Clara was sitting with her back straight, Isabella's voice soft but deliberate. "Rewrite this page. 3 spelling errors. Do it all again." Clara had been sitting there for over 2 hours, her hand trembling as she held the pen. When Leonardo entered, Isabella smiled immediately, shifting her tone. "You're home already?" I'm just teaching her to be more careful with her writing. Clara is smart, just a little distracted. He chuckled, nodded, and went over to pat his daughter's head. Clara said nothing, just looked at her notebook, then turned away quickly. That night, Leonardo noticed Clara was restless in her sleep, shivering, clutching the blanket tightly. He considered waking her but decided against it, not wanting to interrupt her rest. Assuring himself it was probably due to the change in routine. A few days later, Isabella requested that the living room be redecorated. She insisted that the old things needed to be removed. The past only made people weak. Leonardo nodded, not realizing that the old things she referred to were all the photographs of his late wife. Those photos haunt Clara, Isabella insisted. You need to let her forget so she can live well. Leonardo watched as they removed the frames. He hesitated briefly but ultimately remained silent. Maybe she was right. The past should be left in peace. That evening, when Clara came home, she saw the bare wall. No photos of her mom remained, just faint, bright outlines where the frames had hung. The girl stared for a long time, then asked quietly, Dad, where are Mom's pictures? Leonardo froze briefly. I put them away to make the room look brighter. Clara just nodded slightly, but in her eyes, something had broken. From that day on, Clara spoke even less. She ate quickly, finished her homework in a rush, avoiding Isabella's gaze. Every time she heard the click of Isabella's heels on the hardwood floor, Clara held her breath as if anticipating an imminent storm. Once, Leonard went on a business trip for 2 days. When he returned, Clara was sitting in the corner of the staircase hugging her knees, her eyes red. He knelt down, worried. What's wrong, honey? Did something happen? Nothing. Just got dust in my eyes. She looked at her small trembling hands, a slight scratch on her wrist. He wanted to ask more, but stopped. Maybe she fell while playing. Maybe he was overthinking. That night he mentioned to Isabella that Clara seemed tired. She laughed, her voice light as air. Kids. Sometimes all they need is a little scare to behave well. Don't worry. The phrase "a little scare" unsettled him, but Isabella quickly hugged him, whispering, I only want the best for her, you know that. Leonardo didn't insist. He wanted to believe her. He always wanted to believe he had made the right choice with Isabella. But sometimes, waking up in the morning, he had a strange feeling, as if everything in this house was shifting out of his control. There were small sounds, the soft opening of a door, tiptoeing steps, then sudden silence. And every time he asked, Isabella always said, I just got up early to make breakfast. One evening while Leonardo was working in his study, he heard something crash. Stepping out into the hallway, he saw Clara kneeling on the floor picking up shards of a broken mug. Isabella stood over her, cold as stone. You dropped the glass. You clean it up. I'm sorry. Clara's voice was tiny. Sorry isn't enough. You have to learn responsibility. I'm sorry. Leonardo started to approach, but Isabella smiled quickly, turning toward him. It's nothing, honey. Don't worry. She's just a little clumsy, that's all. He said nothing, just felt a growing unease in his stomach, a nameless something that kept him awake all night. From then on, whenever Leonardo looked at his daughter, he began to pay attention to her eyes. They no longer had the same sparkle. Clara's gaze was now like that of someone who had seen too much, but didn't dare speak of it. He suggested to Isabella that maybe Clara should play with friends more often to relax. But she smiled, her voice soft as the breeze. But you don't understand her. She needs discipline, not freedom. Leonardo fell silent. He had always avoided confrontation, and that fear slowly but surely turned him into a spectator in his own home. But Clara wouldn't speak, Isabella wouldn't expose herself, and Leonardo didn't want to see. Yet the things hidden under the silence continued to grow, like a crack spreading from the foundation of the house to the deepest parts of a father's heart. The night before his next business trip, Leonardo passed by Clara's room. She was asleep, curled up hugging her doll, and he stood staring, sighing. Time passed, and with it, Isabella's fake kindness gradually faded. She no longer felt the need to play the role of the good stepmother. Leonardo trusted her completely, and Clara was too fragile to defend herself. In Isabella's eyes, it was a victory. She understood that Leonardo loved his daughter more than anything, but that also made the girl his most exploitable weakness. By making Clara a burden, Leonardo would need her, the woman who knew how to handle things in the house. In the following days, Clara lived in terrified silence. Mealtime, bedtime, the sound of footsteps, everything made the little girl jump. She no longer dared to speak loud or laugh. If she accidentally knocked over a glass of water, Isabella would stop her, forcing her to scrub the floor until it shone. "Clara, you have to learn to be careful. Otherwise, no one will take care of you," she would say with a dry, flat voice. Those words were like little needles pricking the girl's tender heart. Every day, Clara learned to be quiet. She learned not to cry. It was so much that when Leonardo came home and asked, "Did you have a good day at home?" she simply answered very softly, "Yes, I behaved well." And he believed her. One afternoon, the housekeeper suddenly requested leave because her mother was sick. The house was left with only two people, Isabella and Clara. The sky had turned gloomy, and the wind was blowing hard. But Isabella smiled brightly and said, "Today we are going to do something very special. Would you like to plant flowers for your mom?" The question took Clara by surprise. Although scared, she still held a cherished image of her mother, the sweet woman who used to brush her hair every night. Thinking of her mother, Clara nodded. She went to get a small trowel from the storage closet, holding it carefully with both hands. Then followed Isabella to the yard. The land behind the house used to have a small corner where her mother grew sunflowers. But since Isabella arrived, it had been abandoned. Now Isabella pointed directly to that spot. "Dig here, okay? We'll replant flowers for your mom." Her voice was so light that Clara didn't catch the hidden meaning. The girl sank the trowel into the dirt, making small scoops, her fragile hands trembling in the mud. Sweat dripped down her neck, sticking to her collar. With every scoop of the shovel, she remembered her mother. She remembered her hand holding hers to teach her how to arrange flowers. She remembered the clear laughter echoing in the breeze. A tear fell, mixing with the mud. "Dig deeper," Isabella said, her smile fading. I think this is deep enough. "No, deeper. Flowers need space to grow. Your mom will be down there after all." The phrase was like a cold knife cutting the air. Clara looked up, her face covered in dirt. "Mom, where exactly?" Isabella leaned in, her voice lowering, dragging out every word as if savoring the child's anguish. "Right beneath your feet. Dig deeper and you'll find her." Clara froze. She shook her head, tears running down her face. "You're lying. My mom is in heaven." Isabella laughed, a shrill sound that echoed in the empty yard. "In heaven? Do you think people who are gone fly up there? Your mother is under this dirt, right here beneath your feet." Clara broke down in sobs, kneeling, gripping the trowel tightly, her voice cracking. "You're lying. My mom isn't here." "Shut up," Isabella screamed, then leaned close to the girl's face. "You think you know something? You're just a child. You don't deserve a mother. You don't deserve to live. You are the reason she left. Please." The scream was searing, like the crack of a whip. Clara collapsed, her tears mixing with the dirt. Isabella trembled and kept digging, not out of fear of punishment, but out of desperation. She didn't know what else to do, but obeyed. Isabella watched, her eyes gleaming with something distorted, almost triumphant. She captured the scene with her phone, laughing as she spoke. "That's right, good girl. Your mother would be very proud." When Clara was about to collapse from exhaustion, Isabella stopped her. She threw the shovel aside and ordered, "That's enough. Clean this up and then get inside." She turned and walked away, not noticing the motionless figure in the yard. Leonard had returned home earlier than planned. He made no noise. The scene before him left him frozen, his daughter kneeling in the dirt, face stained with tears and mud. And Isabella in her black dress, back turned, hair hanging down, her phone still glowing in her hand. On the ground next to Clara lay an old photograph of his late wife, an image he thought had been packed away long ago. Clara looked up, meeting her dad's eyes. She pressed her lips together, trembling. "Dad!" "I'm sorry." Leonard didn't understand. He just looked around, the freshly dug earth, the small muddy hands, the look of despair. A wrenching sensation tightened in his chest, something shaky, shattered. Isabella turned around, momentarily startled to see him, but in a second recovered her composure, smiling slightly. "You're back early." "I was just helping her planting flowers?" Leonard repeated, his voice raspy. Yes, honey. She misses her mother, so I suggested we do something to remember her." "Honey, what's wrong?" He looked at her for a long time. The way she spoke, the way she smiled, it was all too fluid, too fake. He didn't answer. He just walked over to Clara and lifted her gently. Her small hand was freezing. Isabella remained standing there, her eyes remorseless. "What's wrong, honey? Are you doubting me?" Leonard didn't answer. He led his daughter into the house, walking slowly past Isabella. Their eyes met, one side full of confusion, the other with defiance. That night, Leonard couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of Clara kneeling in the yard, saw the photo of his late wife lying in the mud, and Isabella's laughter echoed somewhere in his head. He jumped up, walking into the living room. On the table, Isabella's phone had been left behind. He opened it, not out of suspicion, but because he needed confirmation that the afternoon's events were just an illusion. But then, after just a few seconds, he froze. In the photo album, there were images of Clara stained, skinny, kneeling in the dirt. Next to it, an audio clip. Isabella's voice, clearly audible. "You don't even deserve to breathe." Leonard gripped the phone tightly, his hand shaking uncontrollably. He couldn't understand how he had allowed this to happen in his own home. Her words became a dull, throbbing cut in his mind. When Isabella came downstairs the next morning, she found Leonard sitting alone, eyes deeply shadowed. He said nothing, just looked out the window. "Are you okay?" she asked, forcing a smile. He answered softly, dryly. "No, I just need to reconsider some things." And no, then his tone was strangely calm. But deep down, something had changed. Doubt had begun to take root, spreading like a small flame creeping into dry wood. And he knew that sooner or later, that flame would incinerate what he once called happiness. Hello. That night, when the house fell silent, Leonard opened a drawer and took out an old set of surveillance cameras. He mounted them one by one in the corners of the walls, in the kitchen, in the hallway, everywhere, and it was all done lightly, skillfully, so Isabella wouldn't notice. He told himself just to be sure. But in truth, deep down, he already knew the worst was about to begin. From the day he witnessed Isabella forcing Clara to kneel in the dirt, Leonardo seemed to transform into a different person. He no longer smiled, no longer spoke much, and it felt as if all sound around him had been vacuumed from the world. Isabella's voice now grated on his ears like metal on metal, sharp, piercing, and inauthentic. Every time she touched his arm, he flinched slightly, as if receiving an electric shock. The first night after that incident, Leonardo stayed awake until dawn in his study. On the desk, a half-finished glass of red wine remained untouched. He stared at the white pages, his mind spinning with the image of Clara bowing her head and crying, her small hands trembling in the mud. He wanted to believe Isabella was just being too strict, that it was a misunderstanding, that he was exaggerating. But then her laugh, the distorted laugh he once found seductive, kept replaying in his head, fragmented and hoarse. From then on, he began to pay attention. Small but repetitive things. Isabella always locked her office door, even though there was apparently nothing to hide. She often took phone calls late at night, her voice low and drawn out, occasionally punctuated by a stifled laugh. When Leonardo asked, she just said it was an old friend from Europe, different time zone, so we talk late. She also started taking control of his work. "You look tired." "Let me handle some documents for you," she would say. Then she softly asked for his company account passwords. She convinced him he needed rest, that what the company needed now was a woman who could handle things with heart. Every word she uttered was wrapped in a layer of sweetness. But it made Leonardo feel increasingly like a stranger in his own life. But Clara? After that terrifying afternoon became even quieter. She was like a little shadow drifting through the house, only obeying, only looking at the floor. Once, Leonardo tried to talk to her, but she only responded with short, broken words. He looked at her hands, noticing the scraped red skin. When he asked, Clara simply replied, "I just slipped." Guilt began to consume him daily. The more he looked at Clara, the more remorse he felt. He saw himself, the dad who had promised to protect his daughter, now watching in silence as she endured suffering. But he had no solid proof, and the rational part of him still clung desperately to the belief that he might be misunderstanding things. Until that night came. Isabella was fast asleep, her breathing steady. Leonardo lay beside her, eyes wide open, unable to rest. He went out to the living room, looked around, and then opened the closet where he had kept the old camera equipment. He installed them again, one by one, in the corner of the kitchen, the living room, the hallway. Everything was done in silence, with care, as if afraid of his own breath. The next day he maintained his usual demeanor. He went to work, returned home on time, had dinner with the family, occasionally forcing a smile. Isabella seemed sweet, as if nothing had happened. But Leonardo knew it was just a mask. When night fell and the house was asleep, he opened his computer to check the camera footage. The first clips were unremarkable. On the second day, the images from the kitchen left him stiff. Clara was clearing the dishes with trembling hands. When Isabella approached, she said something, then abruptly pulled the girl's hair, forcing her to kneel on the floor. It happened quickly and cleanly, without a single scream. But Clara simply bowed her head, her small shoulders hunched. Leonardo couldn't believe his eyes. He rewound and played it again, hoping he had seen wrong. But no, it was real. A raw, cold reality. In the following days, he continued watching. This time, there were images of Isabella throwing a glass of water at Clara when the girl spilled milk, then forcing her to scrub the floor until late at night. Sometimes she just stood watching from afar with arms crossed, eyes indifferent, as if observing an animal. And when Leonardo returned, she would flash a bright smile, hook her arm in his, and say in a sweet voice, "I worry too much about her, but she's so stubborn. You have to be firmer with her." Every one of those sentences made Leonardo feel smaller. He started to fear his own house. One night, on the recorded footage, he saw Isabella standing in the kitchen holding a photo of his late wife. She looked at the photo for a long time, then let out a laugh, a small, bitter laugh, as if conversing with an invisible entity. She spoke softly, mockingly. "Don't look at me like that. I'm doing what you couldn't. I took what was yours, and he loves me for it." Then she burned the photo right in the toaster. The fire cast a red glow on her face, creating an expression half human, half demonic. Leonardo watched the clip over and over, not realizing his own tears were falling. He wondered when he had brought home someone who could stand there and laugh at the memory of the deceased. He stayed awake all night. He sat watching Isabella sleep deeply, her hair messy on the pillow. She looked peaceful, sweet, like a completely different person. And that very contrast terrified him. For the first time, he was afraid of his wife, not because she could cause him harm, but because he didn't know what else she was capable of doing to Clara. The next morning, Isabella entered his study bringing a cup of coffee. She talked about opening a new branch, about new plans, and advised him to take a short break to clear his head. Leonardo listened in silence, his eyes no longer harboring trust. He asked casually, "Who were you talking to on the phone last night?" Isabella paused momentarily, but quickly recovered with a smile. "Oh, it was Marcos. My friend from London. I needed info on a financial project." "No big deal." Marcos. The name resonated in Leonardo's head like a warning bell. Marcos Hale, the rival who had kept him awake for months. Marcos was the man who had publicly promised to get revenge on him. And now that name resurfaced in his wife's conversation in the middle of the night. Isabella noticed his silence, leaning in to gently kiss his cheek. "Don't worry. I know you overthink things. Everything is fine." That "everything is fine" sounded like a skillful lie. That night, Leonardo sat alone staring at the dark screen. He viewed no more images. He didn't need to. It was enough to understand there was a viper hiding in the shadows of this house. But he also knew that if he acted rashly, Isabella would realize. She was too sharp, too smart to be caught easily. So he chose silence. But this time it wasn't compliance. It was preparation. He sent all copies of the videos to a trusted friend. He began collecting every financial report Isabella had touched. Slowly, he was closing the gap between suspicion and certainty. In the darkness, the sound of his pen gliding over paper was like a knife cutting wood. Every line, every signature was a step in a plan he never thought he'd have to execute. Isabella kept smiling every morning. She still made Leonardo's preferred coffee, still left little notes with the message, "Don't work too hard, honey. I love you." It all seemed so normal that a stranger would think they were a happily married couple. But behind that smile, she was slowly weaving her own web of power. Every thread, every intricate trap laid so the man before her would be bound gradually without realizing it. Leonardo, on the contrary, kept his composure. He didn't confront her, didn't ask questions, and showed no sign of suspicion. But every gesture, every look remained meticulously intact, allowing Isabella to continue believing she held all the cards. But in reality, a careful plan was running beneath that guise of silence. She didn't know that every secret phone call, every hastily deleted text message, every cash withdrawal had left a trail. Leonardo hired a private investigator, not the crude type, but someone who knew how to dig into seemingly harmless things. And when the first report landed in his hands, Leonardo had to stop for a long moment, breathing deeply as if to stop his chest from bursting. A portion of the funds in the project reserve, the one he had put Isabella in charge of, had been gradually transferred to a company called Hale Holdings. The name gave him a chill. Marcos Hale, the rival Leonardo had defeated in a highly publicized investment deal 3 years earlier. Marcos had declared to the financial world, "One day, Guzman will have to kneel." Now Leonardo understood the declaration wasn't an empty threat. He traced the history. Isabella had worked with Marcos on a charity project years ago. At that time, she was just a media assistant, and no one suspected they had kept contact until now. The recovered emails slowly revealed a clearer truth. She wasn't just helping Marcos. She was actively proposing a plan to take over shares of Leonardo's company. Bit by bit, what Leonardo had believed was love turned out to be a staged game. At night, he sat in his study, the yellow lamplight illuminating financial documents full of numbers. Every figure, every transaction felt like a knife slicing his self-respect. Perhaps he had been too trusting, too desperate for a pillar of support after his wife's passing. He believed in Isabella's smile. He believed people could start over. But the truth was, he was simply being led into the labyrinth of his own isolation. When Isabella entered with a cup of hot tea, he quickly slid the folder under the drawer. "Working late?" "I told you you need to rest more." Leonardo nodded slightly. "Almost done. Just a few small things." Isabella sat on the edge of the desk, smiling, her hand resting on his shoulder like a mark of ownership. "You know, I think our company should expand our investment branch. I have some friends who could help." Marcos Hale. Leonard let out the name softly without looking at her. Isabella's smile wavered briefly, but she quickly regained her composure. "He's just an old friend." "Why do you ask?" "For nothing. Just remembered the name." She let out a small laugh and left. But Leonardo knew just a comment like that would put her on guard. And that was exactly what he wanted. A few days later, he continued his surveillance. Every time Isabella went out, he recorded the time and location. Until the fateful night arrived. She said she was going to a friend's house, but her car drove directly to a small downtown restaurant. Leonard followed her, parking 2 blocks away. From afar, through the window, he saw Marcos. He was sitting across from Isabella looking confident, eyes full of satisfaction. And she, in a red dress, leaned toward him, her voice marked by laughter. Leonard stood in silence, watching. Without anger, without jealousy. Instead, there was a chilling clarity. He just listened, catching fragments of their conversation carried by the wind. "He's about to sign," Isabella said. "Just 1 more week." Marcos sneered. "Good. When that happens, all assets transfer to Hale Holdings, and I'll keep my word. You won't have to live in the shadow of that woman who left anymore." "I never lived in any shadow," Isabella replied, her voice firm. Leonard left. As midnight approached, rain began to fall, heavy drops hitting the ground. He walked with a numb mind, shoes soaked and freezing. There was no anger left in his heart, only emptiness. The truth that had just been exposed stripped away every emotion. He told no one. He didn't confront her. He didn't show his hand. He simply went home. He looked at Clara sleeping in her room, hair scattered on the pillow. The girl was slightly curled up as if still terrified by a nightmare that hadn't faded. Leonard approached, pulled up the blanket, his hands trembling. He had let things go too far. For his whole life he feared loneliness, feared loss, so he clung to someone unworthy. And the price he paid was that the daughter he loved most now barely dared to look him in the eye. The next morning, Isabella acted as if nothing had happened. She reminded Leonard of the important meeting next week, then said softly, "Remember to sign those power of attorney papers I left on the table. The bank is waiting for them." Leonard looked at the stack of papers, lips tight. "Yes, let me review them first. You trust me, right?" she asked, her voice light. "Yes." Then he nodded slightly, eyes unreadable. "I do trust you," he said slowly. "But I've also learned that who you trust and when matters more than anything." Isabella laughed, but it was slightly forced. She turned around, unaware that in his desk drawer, Leonard had already stored a full copy of financial records, emails, and transaction data. Every detail had been sent to his personal attorney, the only person he could still trust. The sky was heavy and gray that morning, as if it also knew what was about to happen. Leonard put on his coat, tied his tie as usual, his demeanor so calm that Isabella suspected nothing. "Going on a business trip?" she asked, voice sweet like honey. "Yes. Just for a couple of days," he replied concisely. Avoiding her gaze, Isabella smiled, giving him a light peck on the cheek, saying playfully, "Whatever you do, remember to come home to me." Leonard nodded, a silent smile on his face. The door closed, and with the click of the lock, a plan was set in motion. Leonard didn't go far. His car stopped in a parking lot near downtown. Inside the vehicle, Leonard opened his briefcase, inserted a USB drive into his laptop, and checked everything one last time. Videos, financial copies, bank data, even the photos from the rainy night. Everything was neatly compiled. He called his personal lawyer, voice low but firm. "Execute the plan this morning. File the reports with the police and financial authorities. Don't let her take a single extra cent." The lawyer on the other end simply replied, "Understood. You did the right thing." Leonardo hung up, sitting motionless in the car, looking in the rearview mirror. Today his eyes were deeply shadowed, his face pale, looking like both a victor and someone about to lose everything. Meanwhile, back at the house, Isabella was sitting in the living room casually checking her phone, face radiant. She called Marcos, voice excited. "Hello? Listen, he's about to sign. Both the account and the project fund are within reach. I've resolved everything. We can say things are almost finalized." "Thanks," Marcos chuckled and replied. "Excellent. You're brilliant as always." Isabella let out a loud laugh, the laugh of someone who knows she is on the cusp of total victory. But that joy only lasted a few hours. Around noon, sirens howled outside the door. Isabella frowned, looking out. Two black cars pulled up side by side, and several uniformed officers stepped out. One approached. Voice authoritative. "We have a warrant for the search and temporary custody of Mrs. Isabella Guzman, regarding charges of mishandling assets and capital movement." She froze, her face turning ashen. "You ... what? There must be a mistake." "No, ma'am." The officer presented a stack of documents. "This warrant was signed by the court this morning. Please cooperate." The front door swung open, and on the threshold stood Leonard. His gaze was calm, chillingly distant, making her feel as if she were looking at a completely different person. "Leonardo." What are you doing?" Her voice cracked, trembling. He didn't answer. He simply stood there, eyes devoid of anger, holding only a long, dull exhaustion, like embers after a fire. Isabella tried to walk toward him, reaching for his hand. "Listen to me, please. You have to believe me. They're setting me up." He slowly pulled his hand away, speaking deliberately. "I have believed you for the last few years, Isabella. And that is why things are the way they are today." She began to cry, but her tears now carried no weight. "You don't understand. Marcos forced me. I only wanted to help you." Leonard interrupted her, voice even like the wind passing through a door. "Stop lying. You know exactly what you did. And now I know too." The police stepped forward and cuffed her. As the metal latches clicked, Isabella screamed in desperation. "You'll regret this, Leonard. Listen to me. You're ruining both of us." But Leonardo was no longer looking. He turned around, walking back into the house, leaving the screams to be swallowed by the sound of car engines. When the door closed, the house sank into a dense silence. He stood in the middle of the living room, the place once full of fresh flowers on his wedding day, now only holding the faint smell of smoke and a fluttering curtain. Everything felt alien, as if he had just entered a house that didn't belong to him. There was no sense of triumph, no feeling of revenge. Only emptiness. He walked down the hall, stopping at the staircase. Clara was standing there, her small face pale and gaunt, hugging her old doll. She wasn't crying or speaking, just watching him with an expression of total confusion. "Dad?" Her voice was hoarse. "She left?" Leonard nodded. "Yes, she left. You don't have to be afraid anymore." But as he took a step closer, Clara instinctively stepped back. Her eyes were fearful, wary. Leonard stopped, hands suspended in the air. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked quietly. "Yes." Clara didn't answer further, only bowed her head, hugging the doll tighter. But that moment crushed his heart. He understood that the worst thing wasn't Isabella's betrayal, but what she had left behind in his daughter's soul. A nameless fear so deep that no words could extract it. That night, he didn't sleep. The whole house was silent. Leonard sat in the hallway, leaning his back against Clara's bedroom door. Inside, he heard the girl's soft breathing interspersed with fragmented sobs. And he cried. He closed his eyes, listening to those sounds like small knives carving his heart. He wanted to knock, wanted to tell her it was over, that the woman would never return. He wanted to, but he couldn't, because he knew words wouldn't change anything. Trust, the most fragile thing in the world, once broken, cannot be fixed with an apology. Before we continue, please take a moment to leave a comment about this story and rate it from 1 to 10. How are you feeling? If there's anything you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen. I hope you find a moment of peace and reflection as you follow this healing story and its journey of courage and justice. As dawn approached, he was still sitting there. A dim light slipped through the crack of the door, illuminating his face lined with new wrinkles. Clara held an old family photo in her hand where his late wife smiled radiantly, and Clara, then just a tiny toddler, was resting in her mother's arms. He spoke softly, voice low like a confession to the past. "I'm sorry. I let you suffer alone for too long." In that moment, Leonard knew exactly what he had to do. His battle wasn't over. It had simply transformed into a new shape. It was no longer a confrontation with the traitor, but a journey to repair the heart of his precious daughter who was terrified of her own home. He stood up, looking toward his daughter's door, eyes softening. From inside the room, Clara's faint voice echoed. "Hello? Dad? Are you there?" "Yes, I'm here." A moment of silence passed, and then the girl's voice, small and trembling. "I dreamed of Mom. She said I have to forgive today." Leonard froze. In his heart, something melted, an emotion mixed with pain and hope. He placed his hand on the door, voice raspy. "You can dream of Mom as much as you want. She will always be there in your heart." Inside, Clara didn't answer, just remained silent. But the sobbing had stopped. Leonard sat on the floor, resting his head against the wall, watching the morning light slowly filter through the window. He knew the road ahead would be long and lonely. But at least he still had something to believe in. That amidst the rubble, he and his daughter still had each other. The mansion was now strangely empty. Leonard's footsteps echoed, then faded into the cold, expansive space. No more forced laughter from Isabella, no sound of doors slamming when she was angry, no suppressed sobs from his daughter's bedroom. But the silence that remained wasn't peace. It was a heavy stillness that could almost cut off one's breath. Clara still avoided everything. She walked past Leonard like he was a wall, no eye contact, no greeting. No sound escaped her lips. All day, the little girl sat in the corner of her room hugging her worn-out doll. Tired eyes fixed on the patch of yard where the sunflower sprouts remained withered and dry. Leonard observed this scene, feeling his heart contract into a hard knot. He had thought that when Isabella was taken away, everything would get better. He was wrong. What remained wasn't just a reprehensible act, but the fragments of a small soul that had been broken. He tried to start with the smallest things. In the morning, he got up early and cooked breakfast himself. Fried eggs, toast, a glass of warm milk, everything neatly arranged on the dining table. Leonard then sat there waiting in silence. Clara would come down without looking at her dad, just sit silently in the chair across from him, eating a few bites before getting up. Leonard said nothing, didn't stop her, simply nodded as if the mere fact she sat at the table was a sign of revival. In the afternoon, he brought a glass of orange juice to her room. Leonard, putting it on the desk, only whispered, "I'll leave this here, okay?" Clara wouldn't answer, just turned her face to the wall. But Leonard still saw a slight flicker in the corner of her eye, as if she were struggling between the need to trust and persistent fear. At night, he sat reading in the living room, not because he wanted to read, but because he knew Clara was still awake. He wanted her to hear the sound of the page turning, the faint creak of the chair. Normal, non-threatening sounds. They were silent signals saying, "I'm still here, and I won't abandon you." Occasionally, when he passed the hallway, he heard Clara murmuring in her sleep. They were fragmented phrases, unclear. But he could distinguish two words repeated over and over. "Don't be afraid." He began to read everything he could find on child psychology and PTSD. His desk was no longer full of business files, but books on how to rebuild trust in children, fear of abandonment, and invisible wounds. He took notes meticulously on every line, as if relearning how to be a dad from scratch. Once, when Leonard met with a therapist, the doctor looked at him for a long time and asked, "Are you sure you want to commit to this process? It won't be quick, and sometimes it will be very painful." Leonard managed a faint smile, answering with a deep but unwavering voice. What could be more painful than seeing your own daughter afraid to trust her dad? The doctor nodded and then said, "Then you must learn patience. Not to heal her, but to walk through the fear with her." That statement left Leonard in silence for a long time. He suddenly understood that this wasn't a journey for him to fix things or seek redemption, but a journey for the two of them to relearn how to trust one another. Little by little, days passed slowly. Sound gradually returned to the house, but it was fragile. The sound of a spoon hitting a glass of milk, the light patter of feet on the stairs, the quiet opening and closing of a bedroom door. These small sounds were now as precious as breath to Leonard. One morning, he found Clara sitting on the porch, looking intently at the pot of withered sunflowers. He approached, saying nothing, just grabbed the watering can and gently watered the plant next to her. After a while, Clara spoke, voice light as the breeze. Mom planted this, right? Leonard nodded. Yes, your mother loved it very much. She fell silent for a moment, then whispered, and I think Mom wouldn't like to see it leave. He crouched down, touching the dry earth gently. I think so too. How about we replant it? Clara didn't answer, just nodded very slightly. But for Leonard, that was a bigger response than anything else. That night, he passed Clara's room and noticed she had opened the window, letting the night air enter. Something she hadn't done since Isabella arrived. He stood watching, not wanting to break the moment. A few days later, Clara began to talk more. Not with him, but with her therapist. When he picked her up from the session, she only said one sentence. So ... I told her about Mom. Leonard replied, that's good. And about her too? Clara continued, voice slightly trembling. Yes. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. Her small face was still fragile, but there was something different in her eyes, like the first light after a storm. That night, she couldn't help but ask him, Are you mad at me? Clara looked up, staring at him for a long time before saying, No. I don't know. I just feel scared. I know. But I'm going to stay here as long as necessary. The girl fell silent. But when he turned off the light and left the room, a small voice echoed from the darkness. Hey, Dad. Can you not go to work tomorrow? Leonard turned around. The nightlight cast a glow on his face. He smiled. I'm not going anywhere. Tomorrow we'll replant the flowers, okay? Clara nodded, and for the first time in months, he saw her smile. Faint but real. That night, Leonard stayed awake. He went out to the porch looking at the dark sky, but his heart felt less cold. The silence no longer weighed him down. It had become enough space to start over. He knew this journey would be long, perhaps full of voiceless days, silent meals, and evasive glances. But he was ready. Because sometimes, the hardest thing isn't forgiving others, but learning to forgive yourself. In the darkness, Leonard whispered, knowing not if it was to Clara, his late wife, or himself, I will learn again from the beginning. I will learn to listen instead of just watching. Upstairs, Clara moved in her sleep. Her small hand still held the doll tight. But this time, her face seemed more peaceful. Time after the incident moved slowly, as if someone were deliberately prolonging every heartbeat. Then Leonard no longer chased work. No more meetings, contract signings, or public appearances like before. He dedicated most of his time to one thing, helping his daughter learn to live again in a world she had come to fear. Every week, Leonard took Clara to see the therapist. The therapy room was in a small building flooded with natural light. The faint scent of orange essential oil lingered in the air, but for Clara the place was still unknown. She sat silently in the chair, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. It's okay, Clara, the doctor said gently, voice like the breeze. You don't have to talk about anything. You can just draw. In the early days, all her drawings were just black. No sun, no people. Just scribbled strokes like wounds on paper. When Leonard saw them, he didn't comment. He just took them home in silence and taped each one on the wall of his study, where his awards shelf used to be. Every time he looked up, he saw his daughter trying to tell a story, not with words but with fear. Then one day, when he went to pick her up after a session, the doctor handed him a new drawing. I think you should see this. Leonard took it, his heart skipping a beat. In the drawing, there was still a little girl standing in the corner, but above her, for the first time, appeared a patch of blue sky. Not perfect, not uniform, but blue. The color of hope. He stared for a long time, hand trembling slightly. She drew this herself? The doctor smiled. No one suggested it. Perhaps Clara is finding a safe place in her own mind again. That night, Leonard hung the drawing on the living room wall. When Clara walked by, she stopped, a fleeting glint in her eyes before looking down again. But he had seen it. He knew she understood. From then on, Leonard began inviting her to do small tasks together. In the morning, he asked Clara to mix the batter for baking. She just watched at first, then silently placed her hand on the spoon, stirring with him. Flour got in her hair, on her cheeks, making him laugh. Leonardo. Clara looked at him, lips pressed to contain a smile. But finally, a small giggle escaped. The first laugh after so many months. Leonardo said nothing, just watched, recording that moment in his heart. He brought home a new pot of sunflowers. Shall we try planting them again? Clara hesitated, then nodded softly. Father and daughter knelt together in the dirt bed, his hand covered in soil, her hands carefully placing each bulb as cautiously as depositing trust. For the first time, Clara didn't flinch when his hand touched hers. Time flowed, and those small things slowly turned into routine. Every morning, Clara opened her window, letting light into her room. At night, she brought new drawings to her dad. But they were no longer entirely black, but a mixture of colors, blue, yellow, sometimes even light pink dot in one picture. Leonard recognized the image of two people standing under a blooming sunflower tree. He asked, "Who did you draw?" Clara answered, voice small but clear. "You and me, Dad." He said no more, just nodded, smiling gently. That night, he hung the drawing where Isabella's wedding photo used to be. He had put that photo away long ago, not of hate, but because he understood that the past no longer had a place in this house. When Clara woke up the next morning and saw her drawing displayed there, she stood for a long time. Then she turned and gave her dad a very slight hug. From that day on, their house gradually recovered its sound. Small bursts of laughter whenever Clara accidentally mixed the dough too vigorously, sending flour flying around the kitchen. The clatter of the chair every morning when the girls sat at the dining table alone. The sound of Leonard telling short bedtime stories. Even though sometimes Clara only listened and never asked for more. In one afternoon, when the sun poured golden light onto the porch, Clara was sitting outside drawing. Leonard stood at a distance watching her head bowed, hair swaying gently in the breeze. Then suddenly, he realized how long it had been since this house saw a child drawing in the sunlight like this. He approached, asking quietly, "What are you drawing today?" Clara didn't look up, just replied, "I'm drawing light." "The light?" He repeated, chuckling softly. "Why?" "Because I think it's back," Clara said, looking up, eyes bright. Leonard looked at his daughter for a long time, then put his hand on her shoulder gently, as if afraid to shatter the moment. He didn't need to say anything else, because everything he had been looking for, life, forgiveness, and a reason to believe, was present right before him. That night, he sat in the living room looking at the picture she hung. The lamplight illuminated the wall, making the blue in the drawing seem brighter. Outside, the night wind whispered softly through blooming sunflowers. He closed his eyes, listening to that small but vibrant sound. It was no longer the heavy silence of old times, but the stillness of peace where every wound began to fill with love. Clara came downstairs holding a glass of milk, hair messy, eyes sleepy. "Hi, you still awake, Dad?" "I was thinking." "Thinking about what?" "About your drawing." Clara sat next to him, resting her head on his shoulder, voice small. "I think Mom would like it." Leonard nodded. "I think so too. She would be very proud." Father and daughter sat in silence, saying nothing more. But outside, the night was fading, and dawn was approaching. In that moment, Leonard understood he didn't have to forget the darkness. He just needed enough courage to walk through it. Because then, the light would find its own way back. And the Guzman house, for the first time in years, felt the warmth of a true home again. A year after Isabella was taken away, spring returned. There was no more damp winter cold, no more heavy rain clinging to the porch. Just clear blue sky and a field of blooming yellow sunflowers stretching like ribbons of light to the horizon. That morning, Leonard knocked gently on Clara's door. "Are you awake?" His voice was deep but soft. "Yes, it's time, Dad," the girl replied. Voice small but no longer fearful like before. Yes, let's visit Mom today. Clara remained silent a long pause, seemingly about to end with the familiar nod. But then the door opened. She appeared in a simple white dress, holding a bouquet of fresh yellow sunflowers. But Leonard stood still, not surprised, but with a deep sense of gratitude. A courage had blossomed inside the girl he thought had lost all faith in the world. On the way to the cemetery, father and daughter said nothing. The car hummed steadily, wind blew through the open window, and soft sunlight shone on Clara's hand. She looked outside, gaze distant. Dad? She whispered. Did Mom forgive you? Leonard gripped the steering wheel. The question felt like someone squeezing his chest. He took a deep breath, answering slowly. I don't know. But I think Mom never hated me. She was just sad because I didn't protect you sooner. Clara tilted her head. Me too. The car stopped in front of a small hillside garden. The grave of the woman from years ago was as simple as she had been in life, a white headstone engraved with her name. Surrounded by sunflowers, Leonard had hired someone to tend monthly. Clara walked slowly toward it, hand trembling slightly. She crouched, placing the yellow sunflower on the cold stone. I miss you, Mom. Her voice was barely a whisper. But I'm not afraid anymore. Leonard stood behind her, afraid to move. Every word from his daughter was like a small, deep cut in his heart. But inside him, there was a soft light. He realized Clara wasn't just talking to the person who left, but to herself, to the past that had tormented her throughout her childhood. I think your mother is very proud of you, he said, voice hoarse. For being so brave. Clara looked up, eyes clear. I don't know if she can hear me. Yes, she can. The people we truly love never leave entirely. They stayed there for a long time. No one cried anymore. There were no sobs or self-reproach. Just the wind blowing through the petals, making them sway gently, as if smiling. When the sun began to set in the west, Leonard said quietly, Let's go home, honey. Clara nodded. Before turning around, she crouched, whispering, Mom, I'm going to replant the sunflower garden at home. Just like you used to. And that sentence made Leonard turn around, because if he looked for a moment longer, he knew he would cry. On the way home, Clara sat silently holding the remaining flowers. Her small hands gripped them so tight the petals were slightly crushed, but her face was serene. Leonard looked in the rearview mirror, seeing for the first time that his daughter no longer had fear in her eyes. Just the stillness of a soul that was growing. When they got home, it was twilight. The last rays of sun slanted across the back garden, the place that had once been a nightmare, where Isabella had forced Clara to kneel in the mud. Leonard hesitated to get out, but Clara opened the door before him. Dad, she said, holding the small trowel. I want to plant one more plant. Leonard was surprised. Which plant, honey? Mom's plant. He looked at the girl, heart tightening. Then he said nothing, just nodded. Father and daughter knelt together in the old dirt patch. This time there were no sobs or tears. Just the steady sound of dirt falling, their breaths mixing. And the soft afternoon light bathing the girl's thin shoulders. I think this plant will bloom soon, Leonard said softly. It doesn't have to be soon, Clara replied, eyes still on the soil. As long as it lives. Leonard smiled, gaze landing on her small hand, fragile but strangely firm. He realized she was no longer the child trapped by fear. Clara was learning to dig herself out of the things that had affected her with her own small hands. When they finished cleaning up, darkness had settled. The seeds lay peacefully under the dirt, waiting to sprout. Clara stared, then said quietly, Dad, I think Mom would like this place. Leonard replied, I think so too. They sat together on the porch, silently watching the garden. A sensation surged in Leonard that he hadn't experienced in a long time. No, not happiness, but peace. A true tranquility after years of being torn between guilt and loss. He looked at his daughter, whispering, You know, I once thought salvation was forgetting the past. But I was wrong. Salvation is having the courage to look back at it and move forward. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. I think so too. If it weren't for the past, I wouldn't know how to plant a tree. The comment made Leonard laugh, a genuine rare smile no longer tinged with sadness. As the sky darkened completely, father and daughter went inside through the window. The garden was still illuminated by a small lamp shining on the freshly planted dirt. A patch of ground that had once been a symbol of fear was now the birthplace of new life. Leonard stood by the window looking down, speaking softly as if sending a message to the person who departed. God, thank you for leaving me this child. I promise I won't let her be afraid ever again. Time moved forward, and the Guzman house slowly recovered its breath of life. No more silent, suffocating mornings, no more hesitant footsteps in the hallway. Now every morning Leonard heard water running in the kitchen, the soft clinking of knives, and his daughter's faint humming echoing. Clara had grown, and more importantly, had learned to smile without fear. She went to school, made friends, and sometimes talked about her mother in a light tone, as if talking about an acquaintance, no longer crying like before. Clara learned piano, took art classes, and occasionally came home with paint stains on her hands. Leonard just smiled, never scolding her. He still waited for her at the school gate in the old car they had chosen together. Sometimes Clara ran and hugged him from behind, radiant. Dad, I got an A today! Leonard only needed that a laugh, a moment to feel his life stitching itself back together, piece by piece. The sunflower garden behind the house was now different. It was no longer a place of tears or screams. Now it was the place where father and daughter worked together every weekend. Every flower that sprouted had a unique name given by Clara. Mom, Light, Hope, New Day. Leonard didn't correct her, just recorded them silently in a small notebook. He, after years of being immersed in work, had finally learned to slow down. But every morning, he no longer turned on his computer first. Instead, he made 2 cups of hot tea, one for him, one for Clara. Sometimes the girl woke up early, opened her door, and whispered, Dad, the flowers are blooming. And Leonard, however busy he was, went out to the porch, watching the sunflower petals dancing in the sun, heart light as a sigh. One afternoon before the sun had set completely, Leonard found Clara sitting under the biggest sunflower, the one they had replanted together the previous year. She was bent over writing something on a small piece of paper. He approached and asked, What are you doing? Clara looked up, voice soft. I'm writing to Mom, but for you too, Dad. Leonard sat next to her without asking further. Clara continued, I just wanted to say, if it weren't for you, Dad, I don't think I'd trust anyone again. Leonard stood in silence. No word was adequate for a response. He simply crouched and hugged her. The warmth was real, soft, and sufficient. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but contained everything they had lost. Trust, affection, and peace. As the sun set, father and daughter remained seated in the garden full of yellow flowers. Clara looked at her dad, saying quietly, Now we start planting from scratch. Yes. Leonard smiled, a soft smile no longer clouded by sadness. He nodded. Yes, starting over. But this time we'll take care of it with all our heart. The last rays of daylight fell, resting on Clara's hair, making her look like she was glowing. Then Leonard looked at his daughter, realizing suddenly that all the pain they had endured, all the loss and betrayal, ultimately only led them to this moment, where peace was no longer something to seek, but something to cultivate every day. And in that instant, while Clara gently planted another sunflower bulb in the dirt, Leonard knew that everything lost eventually became the soil itself, the soft earth that nourishes something new. As the light spread across the garden, he realized this dawn didn't belong to just one of them, but to both. 2 people who had walked through the darkness to find each other again. And that is the bedtime story for today. A story about the journey of healing, about a dad who learned to love again, and a little girl who learned to trust once more. A story without magic, but something even more powerful. Faith and love replanted from old wounds. What are your reflections after listening to this story? Which of Leonardo's actions impressed you most? When he chose silence to protect his daughter, Or when he patiently helped Clara recover her smile every day? And were you moved by Clara's strength? The little girl who dared to face her past and say, "I'm not afraid anymore." Please leave your comments below and hit the like button. Share with me your favorite character and the moment of the story that touched your heart the most. I sincerely hope to read your thoughts so we can talk more about the journey through darkness to find the light within ourselves.